Welcome to Hazard Communication Training. Presented by Bonneville Labs. The purpose of this training is to provide you with the knowledge and skills you need to work safely with hazardous materials and to reduce the risk of injury or illness from chemical exposure. There are several objectives of this training, including to inform you about the potential hazards associated with the chemicals and materials you work with, including the types of health effects that can result from exposure. To teach you how to identify hazardous materials and understand the information provided on labels and safety data sheets. To provide you with information on how to use hazardous materials safely, including proper handling, storage, and disposal techniques. To teach you how to use personal protective equipment and other safety measures to protect yourself from chemical exposure. To help you understand the emergency procedures that should be followed in case of a chemical spill or other accident involving hazardous materials. It is important that you pay attention during this training. Remember, your safety is our top priority. Let's get started. The key elements of the Hazard Communication Standard, also known as HAZCOM. The key elements of HAZCOM include goals: to provide workers with the knowledge and skills to work safely with hazardous materials and to reduce the risk of injury or illness from chemical exposure. Requirements: written hazard communication program, information and training on hazardous chemicals, labels and safety data sheets, SDSs, for all hazardous chemicals. Responsibilities: employers must implement and maintain the hazard communication program and provide information and training to workers on hazardous chemicals. Workers must use hazardous materials safely, follow proper handling and storage procedures, and wear appropriate personal protective equipment, PPE. Information and training: employers must provide information and training to workers on hazardous chemicals, including potential hazards, identification, and safe use. Identifying and classifying hazards: employers must identify and classify the hazards of the chemicals and materials used in the workplace, including evaluating health and physical hazards and necessary precautions and protective measures. Labeling and signs: employers must label all containers of hazardous chemicals with hazard warnings and post-warning signs in areas where hazardous chemicals are used or stored. Safety data sheets: SDSs: employers must have SDSs for all hazardous chemicals and provide workers with access to them. Contractors and vendors: employers must inform contractors and vendors about the hazards of the chemicals and materials used in the workplace and provide them with necessary information and training. Risk assessments for new tasks: employers must conduct risk assessments for any new tasks involving hazardous chemicals and provide workers with necessary information and training. It is important to follow these requirements and guidelines to ensure the safety of all workers in the workplace. Here are the HAZCOM goals. To inform you about the hazardous chemicals you work with, including the associated hazards and how they can hurt you. To teach you how to handle hazardous chemicals safely to protect yourself from the hazards. To meet these goals, employers must ensure that all chemical hazards are evaluated and that the necessary information is communicated to employees through labeling, safety data sheets, and training. The Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, GHS, is an internationally agreed upon system for classifying and labeling chemicals according to their hazards. It provides a standardized format for safety data sheets, SDSs, which are documents that provide information on the hazards, handling, storage requirements of chemical substances and mixtures, and emergency procedures. One of the requirements of HAZCOM is to create a hazardous chemical inventory, which involves identifying all of the hazardous chemicals present in the workplace. This includes all hazardous chemicals that are used, stored, or produced on site. It is important to have a complete and accurate inventory of all hazardous chemicals in the workplace to ensure that employees are provided with the necessary information and training to work safely with these chemicals. The Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, GHS, is an internationally agreed upon system for classifying and labeling chemicals according to their hazards. It provides a standardized format for safety data sheets, SDSs, which are documents that provide information on the hazards, handling, storage requirements of chemical substances and mixtures, and emergency procedures. Ensuring the safe storage of hazardous chemicals is important for protecting ourselves and those around us. To store hazardous chemicals properly, follow these guidelines. Use containers that are specifically designed for storing chemicals. Label the container clearly. Label the container with the chemical's name, hazard warning symbols, and any other relevant information. Store the chemical in a secure location. Regularly check the condition of the container. If the container is damaged or leaking, dispose of it safely and replace it with a new, properly labeled container. To protect our workers when handling hazardous chemicals, it's important to provide them with proper training. Our HAZCOM training program will include the following elements: identifying all hazardous chemicals in the workplace, determining the potential hazards and protective measures associated with each chemical, developing a training program that covers these hazards and measures, delivering the training to all relevant employees, documenting the training for record-keeping purposes. By implementing this training program, we can ensure that our workers are prepared to handle hazardous chemicals safely and effectively. To protect our workers and comply with OSHA regulations, a written HAZCOM program that includes a list of hazardous chemicals and their hazards, handling, storage, and disposal procedures, an employee training program, a system for communicating hazard information. This program will ensure the safety of our workers and compliance with the hazard communication standard. When working with hazardous materials, it is important to take certain precautions to ensure the safety of yourself and those around you. This includes identifying potential hazards before starting the job, ensuring that containers of hazardous materials are properly labeled, reading and understanding container labels and SDS, following all instructions and warnings related to chemical handling and usage, and participating in any necessary training programs. By following these guidelines, we can help to prevent accidents and protect ourselves and others from harm. When working with hazardous materials, it is important to take certain precautions to ensure the safety of yourself and those around you. As part of our company's commitment to ensuring the safety and health of our employees, we have implemented a hazard communication standard. As part of this standard, all employees must receive information and training on the following topics. Where our written program on hazardous substances is located, it is important for employees to know where to find our written program on hazardous substances, as this document contains important information about how to handle and store these materials safely. Chemical inventory. Employees should be aware of the types of hazardous substances that are present in their work area and the potential hazards associated with these materials. Our chemical inventory can help employees to identify the substances that they may be working with and the necessary precautions to take. Areas where hazardous substances are present. Employees should be aware of the areas in the workplace where hazardous substances are present and the necessary precautions to take when working in these areas. Where our company SDS sheets are located and how to read them. SDS sheets provide important information about the environmental, physical, and health hazards associated with hazardous substances. It is important for employees to know where to find our company's SDS sheets and how to read them to obtain this information before using a hazardous substance. Labeling requirements and how to read labels. Labels on containers of hazardous substances provide important information about the hazards of the substance and the necessary precautions to take when handling it. Employees should be familiar with our company's labeling requirements and know how to read labels to identify the hazards of the substances they are working with. By being informed and trained on these topics, employees can better understand the potential hazards associated with hazardous substances and take the necessary precautions to protect themselves and others. There are several places where you can get information on hazardous materials. The manufacturer or supplier of a hazardous material is often the best source of information about the hazards and safe handling procedures for the material. This information may be provided on the product label or safety data sheet, SDS. Chemicals may possess flammable, oxidative, reactive, explosive, and other potentially dangerous properties. It is important to identify and become familiar with the physical hazards of a hazardous substance before working with all chemicals. Physical hazards are substances or materials that have the potential to cause harm to people or property through their physical properties. Some examples of physical hazards include flammable materials, explosives, oxidizers, self-reactive substances, pyrophoric substances, self-heating materials, corrosive materials, gases under pressure, combustible liquids, water-reactive substances, and radioactive materials. It is important to handle and store these materials safely to prevent accidents or incidents that could result in injury or damage. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, considers a health hazard to be any chemical that has the potential to cause short-term, acute, or long-term, chronic, health problems, skin corrosion or irritation, serious eye damage, respiratory sensitization, skin sensitization, germ cell mutagenicity, carcinogenicity, reproductive toxicity, aspiration hazard, specific target organ toxicity, or inhalation hazard. It is important to handle and use chemicals safely to prevent accidents or incidents that could result in injury or illness. This includes wearing personal protective equipment, using proper ventilation, and following the manufacturer's instructions for handling and using the chemical. Toxic entities are substances or agents that have the potential to cause harm to living organisms. These entities can be chemical, biological, physical, or radiation in nature. The routes of transmission refer to the ways in which these toxic entities can enter the body and cause harm. Inhalation. This occurs when toxic substances are inhaled into the lungs through the respiratory system. Skin contact. This can occur through injection, such as from a needle, absorption, such as through the skin, or contact with the skin. Ingestion. This occurs when toxic substances are ingested or swallowed, such as through food or drink. It is important to handle and use toxic substances safely to prevent accidents or incidents that could result in injury or illness. This includes wearing personal protective equipment, using proper ventilation, and following the manufacturer's instructions for handling and using the substance. Toxic entities are substances or agents that have the potential to cause harm to living organisms. These entities can be chemical, biological, physical, or radiation in nature. The routes of transmission refer to the ways in which these toxic entities can enter the body and cause harm. Inhalation. This occurs when toxic substances are inhaled into the lungs through the respiratory system. Skin contact. This can occur through injection, such as from a needle, absorption, such as through the skin, or contact with the skin. Ingestion. This occurs when toxic substances are ingested or swallowed, such as through food or drink. It is important to handle and use toxic substances safely to prevent accidents or incidents that could result in injury or illness. This includes wearing personal protective equipment, using proper ventilation, and following the manufacturer's instructions for handling and using the substance. It is important to note that the GHS, Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, and the NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, use different systems for classifying the hazards of chemicals. The GHS uses a numerical system to classify the acute toxicity of hazardous substances, with Category 1 indicating the highest risk and Category 4 indicating the lowest risk. In contrast, the NFPA uses a rating system that uses numbers from 0 to 4 to indicate the level of hazard posed by a chemical, with 0 being the least hazardous and 4 being the most hazardous. For example, a GHS Category 1 substance would be considered extremely hazardous according to the GHS system, but would be rated as a 4 on the NFPA scale, which indicates that it is a severe hazard. It is important to understand the differences between these systems and to use the appropriate system when evaluating the hazards of chemicals. A signal word is used on chemical labels to indicate the level of severity of a hazard and alert the reader to the potential hazard. The signal words are danger and warning, with danger being used for more severe hazards and warning being used for less severe hazards. The signal word for each hazardous chemical can be found on the Material Safety Data Sheet, MSDS, or Safety Data Sheet, SDS, for the chemical and must be included on the label. Labels for mixtures of hazardous chemicals must include the more severe signal word. It is important to pay attention to the signal word when handling hazardous chemicals, as it can help you to understand the potential risks and take appropriate precautions to protect yourself and others. Hazard statements are standardized phrases that describe the hazards of a chemical. They are included on the label to inform users about the potential risks of the chemical. Hazard statements can describe a variety of hazards, such as flammability, toxicity, corrosivity, and irritation. Every applicable hazard statement from the Material Safety Data Sheet, MSDS, or Safety Data Sheet, SDS, must be included on the container label. If two chemicals in a mixture require different hazard statements in the same GHS hazard class, the more severe of the two is used on the label. Some examples of hazard statements include highly flammable liquid and vapor, toxic if swallowed, in contact with skin, or if inhaled, and causes severe skin burns and eye damage. It is important to read and understand the hazard statements on chemical labels to be aware of the potential risks of the chemical and take appropriate precautions when handling it. Precautionary statements are standardized phrases that describe the recommended or required measures to minimize or prevent adverse effects resulting from exposure to or improper storage and handling of a hazardous chemical. These statements are directly related to the hazard statements assigned to a chemical and provide guidance on how to minimize or prevent the identified hazards. For example, a hazardous chemical that includes the hazard statement fatal if inhaled may have the precautionary statement do not breathe dust, fume, gas, mist, vapor, spray to advise users not to inhale the chemical. Every precautionary statement listed on the Hazardous Chemicals Material Safety Data Sheet, MSDS, or Safety Data Sheet, SDS, must be included on its container label. There are 4 types of precautionary statements. Prevention. These statements provide guidance on how to prevent exposure to the chemical, such as do not allow contact with water and wear protective gloves. First aid response. These statements provide guidance on what to do in case of accidental exposure to the chemical, such as if on skin wash with plenty of water and if inhaled, remove person to fresh air. Storage. These statements provide guidance on how to store the chemical safely, such as store in a well-ventilated place and protect from sunlight. Disposal. These statements provide guidance on how to properly dispose of the chemical, such as dispose of in accordance with local. Pictograms are symbols used on chemical labels to alert users to the hazards of a chemical. There are 9 pictograms that represent physical hazards, health hazards, or environmental hazards. These pictograms are determined by the Chemical Hazard Classification and may be included on the label based on information from the Material Safety Data Sheet, MSDS, or Safety Data Sheet, SDS. The pictograms are health hazard, flammables, health irritant or other harmful effects, gases under pressure, corrosives, explosives, oxidizers, environmental hazards, and acute toxicity. It is important to pay attention to the pictograms on chemical labels to be aware of the potential hazards of the chemical and take appropriate precautions when handling it. Alternative labeling systems, such as the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA, 704 Hazard Diamond and the Hazardous Materials Identification System, HMIS, are permitted on primary or secondary workplace containers in addition to the standardized GHS labeling system. These systems use different color coding and rating systems to convey the hazards of a chemical. The NFPA 704 Hazard Diamond consists of 4 color-coded sections: red for flammable and combustible hazards, yellow for reactive and oxidizing hazards, blue for health hazards, and white for special hazards or additional information. Each section is also assigned a number from 0 to 4, with 4 being the most severe hazard and 0 being the least severe. The HMIS system also uses color coding and a numbering system to convey the hazards of a chemical. The colors used in the HMIS system are red for flammable and combustible hazards, yellow for reactive and oxidizing hazards, and blue for health hazards. The numbering system used in the HMIS system ranges from 0 to 4, with 0 being the least hazardous and 4 being the most hazardous. Chemical labeling is a system used to communicate the hazards of a chemical to users. It is important to understand the information provided on chemical labels to be aware of the potential hazards and take appropriate precautions when handling and using the chemical. Chemical labeling is a system used to communicate the hazards of a chemical to users. It is important to understand the information provided on chemical labels to be aware of the potential hazards and take appropriate precautions when handling and using the chemical. GHS labels are used to clearly and immediately communicate the hazards of a chemical to users. The labels include 6 elements: the product identifier, signal word, hazard statement, pictograms, precautionary statements, and supplier identification. 4 of these elements, signal word, hazard statements, pictograms, and precautionary statements, are based on the chemical's hazard class and category according to the GHS system. It is important to ensure that the information on the label is consistent with the safety data sheet and chemical inventory. The label serves as a quick reference for the user, but is not intended to be the sole source of safety and hazard information. Labels on shipped containers, also known as primary containers, should never be removed, modified, or defaced. If a label needs to be replaced, the new one must contain the same exact information. The product identifier on the label must match the one on the SDS. GHS-compliant chemical container labels must include 6 elements: the product identifier, signal word, hazard statements, pictograms, precautionary statements, and the name, address, and telephone number of the chemical manufacturer, importer, or other responsible party. If a new hazard is identified, OSHA regulations require labels to be updated within 3 months, for Cal OSHA, or 6 months, for Federal OSHA. It is important to never use a chemical from an unlabeled container or a container with an unreadable label for your own safety. If you transfer a chemical from one container into another, be sure to label the container with the name of the chemical. In-house containers of hazardous chemicals in the workplace must be labeled with product identifier, signal word, hazard statements, and/or pictograms to provide information on physical and health hazards. Contact your safety officer for assistance with labeling. It is important to note that all hazardous chemicals must be labeled, regardless of the type or size of container they are stored in. This includes primary containers, such as drums and tanks, as well as portable secondary containers, such as bottles and jars. The labels on these containers must contain certain information, including the product identifier, signal word, hazard statements, pictograms, and precautionary statements, as well as the name, address, and telephone number of the chemical manufacturer or importer. This information helps to alert workers to the potential hazards associated with the chemical and provides guidance on how to safely handle and use the chemical. It is important to follow all labeling requirements and to never use a chemical from an unlabeled or unreadable container. If you have any questions about the labeling requirements for hazardous chemicals in the workplace, it is best to consult with your company's safety officer or a qualified professional. Biological hazard tags are an important component of a hazard communication program in a work setting where hazardous biological agents are used or stored. They help to alert employees and others to the presence of a potential hazard. The tags should be prominently displayed and clearly legible. Per Cal OSHA 3341. Biological hazard tags shall be used to identify the actual or potential presence of a biological hazard and to identify equipment, containers, rooms, and experimental animals. It is important to follow proper procedures for handling and disposing of hazardous biological materials to protect both workers and the environment. Hazardous waste must be labeled with specific information required by RCRA, DOT, and DTSC regulations. This includes the composition and physical state of the waste, statements about its hazardous properties, the accumulation start date, and the name and address of the generator. Contact your safety officer for help with labeling hazardous waste properly. A safety data sheet, SDS, is a document that provides information on the hazards, handling, and safe use of a chemical or product. It is intended to assist with workplace safety and helps to ensure that appropriate precautions are taken when working with hazardous materials. SDSs are also known as Material Safety Data Sheets, MSDS. Safety data sheets are prepared in accordance with HAZCOM regulations. They discuss the labeling of the product, human health warnings, environmental impacts, emergency response procedures, and spill cleanup procedures, and provide detailed information about the composition, hazards, chemical interactions and reactions, precautions, fire and explosion data, and control measures of hazardous compounds. They explain what you need to know to safely work with a chemical. Must have the GHS specified 16-section format. Must include certain types of information in each section. Help ensure that employers and employees understand the chemical. Must be readily accessible to employees in the work area during each work shift. Always check the date to make sure the SDS is current and read and understand the SDS before using a chemical, especially if that chemical is new to you. It's important to note that not all of these sections may be applicable to every chemical, and some sections may contain more information than others. It's also important to be aware that the information in a safety data sheet may change over time, so it's important to regularly check the date to ensure that you are using the most current version of the SDS. Always read and understand the safety data sheet before using a chemical. It's important to note that while SDSs do expire, it's the information on the SDS that may change over time, not the chemical itself. Any updated SDS should be sent within 3 months of any new and significant information regarding the given hazardous chemical. The expiration depends on the discovery of new and significant information, including any changes in classification, new hazards, new risk management, and/or new exposure limits. The SDS should be modified within 3 months. If you're an end user, you are responsible for ensuring you have the latest version on file and accessible for employees in their work area. If you're unsure if the SDS you have is the most current version, you can reach out to the manufacturer or supplier for an updated version. It's also a good idea to review the SDS regularly to make sure you have all the necessary information you need to work safely with the chemical. It is important to note that employers have a legal obligation to provide this information to contractors and vendors working on their site. It is also important to ensure that contractors and vendors have the necessary training and understanding of the hazardous substances they may be exposed to while working on site, as well as the appropriate protective measures they should take to minimize potential exposure. It is important to perform a risk assessment whenever a new task is introduced that involves the use of hazardous chemicals. This includes identifying the specific hazards of the chemical based on the information provided in the SDS, determining the protective and safety measures that must be utilized, and implementing measures to reduce the hazards, such as ventilation or the use of respirators. It is also important to provide this information to all affected employees and to document the training for a minimum of 3 years. If you need assistance with performing a risk assessment, you can contact your safety officer for guidance. It is important to report all work-related injuries, illnesses, incidents, and near misses as soon as possible in order to prevent further harm and to ensure that appropriate measures are taken to address the issue. Reporting incidents helps to identify potential hazards and allows for corrective actions to be taken to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. In addition, reporting incidents can help to ensure that injured employees receive the necessary medical care and support. It is also important to report near misses, which are incidents that could have resulted in injury or harm but were avoided through luck or timely intervention. Near misses can be valuable indicators of potential hazards and can help to identify areas for improvement in safety procedures. Simple actions you can take to stay safe while working with chemicals include: review the SDS to know and understand the hazards. Follow the PPE requirements in the SDS. Use eye and face protection. After using a chemical, wash your hands. Clean and store safety equipment properly. Know where the nearest eye wash station or emergency shower are located. Dispose of hazardous chemicals properly as hazardous waste. Know how to deal with spills and leaks. Know how to respond in an emergency. Thank you for taking this training. To complete the training and ensure you receive credit, please complete the quiz.